Jasmine Crockett had faced her share of tough battles in politics, but no one expected her latest move to hit with such force. When she announced a $90 million lawsuit against Karoline Leavitt, the political world froze. Reporters scrambled, cameras rolled, and within minutes, the news spread across every network. Karoline Leavitt had spent weeks publicly mocking Crockett, calling her all talk and no action. She dismissed Crockett's legal background and painted her as unprepared to stand against the big players in Washington. What Leavitt didn't anticipate was that Crockett was quietly building a case so airtight it would shake the foundations of Leavitt's political brand. The lawsuit revealed a trail of financial deals, questionable endorsements, and backroom agreements that Leavitt had tried to keep hidden. Crockett laid out the evidence with precision: contracts, emails, and recorded conversations that told a story of political arrogance and hidden favors. As the cameras zoomed in, Leavitt's confident smirk slowly faded. For the first time, she was speechless. The courtroom itself became a theater of humiliation. Crockett stood tall, her voice steady, as she recited the details of how Leavitt allegedly manipulated donors and misrepresented her influence. Each point landed like a hammer, and the press gallery erupted with gasps and furious typing. Leavitt, once seen as untouchable, sat visibly shaken, her attorneys whispering frantically at her side. Clips of the exchange went viral. On social media, hashtags about Crockett's lawsuit trended for days, while Leavitt faced an avalanche of criticism. Late-night hosts replayed the footage of her reaction again and again, calling it the collapse of her confidence in real time. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She simply told reporters, "This is about accountability. No one is above the truth." That single line became a rallying cry across platforms, shared by supporters who praised her courage. By the end of the week, Leavitt's reputation was in shambles. Former allies distanced themselves, donors pulled back, and commentators declared the lawsuit a career-ending blow. The woman who had tried to humiliate Jasmine Crockett was now the one humiliated, on the biggest stage possible. The second day after the lawsuit was filed brought even more chaos. News crews surrounded Karoline Leavitt's office, demanding answers, while her staff scrambled to control the narrative. But every attempt to spin the story only made things worse. Reporters uncovered documents that matched the evidence Crockett had already laid out, confirming that this wasn't some empty threat. It was real, and it was dangerous to Leavitt's career. Inside her office, Leavitt was furious. She slammed the table, shouting at her aides, demanding to know how Crockett had gotten hold of private communications. One aide tried to reassure her, saying they could delay the case, but deep down they knew the damage was already spreading too fast. Meanwhile, Crockett appeared on live television for the first time since filing the lawsuit. Calm, collected, and laser-focused, she explained the reasoning behind her case. "This is not about politics," she said firmly, "this is about truth, accountability, and protecting the public from deception." The clip instantly went viral. Viewers praised her poise and strength, contrasting it with Leavitt's frantic denials. Even those who hadn't paid much attention before suddenly became invested in the showdown. Leavitt had expected Crockett to crumble under pressure, but instead, she was the one losing control of the narrative. When the first hearing finally arrived, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Journalists filled every seat, cameras swarmed the entrance, and spectators whispered as if waiting for history to unfold. Karoline Leavitt walked in first, trying to project confidence. She wore a sharp suit, her head held high, but the tension in her jaw betrayed her. Behind her, a team of attorneys shuffled papers, clearly preparing for a fight they weren't sure they could win. Then Jasmine Crockett entered. Unlike her opponent, she didn't rush or posture. She walked with calm authority, holding a slim binder filled with carefully organized evidence. The crowd instantly leaned in, her presence alone commanded attention. The judge called the court to order, and within minutes, Crockett began presenting her case. She spoke with clarity, outlining how Leavitt had allegedly misled donors, funneled money through questionable channels, and attempted to cover her tracks. Each statement was backed by a document, an email, or a recording. Leavitt tried to keep her composure, but as the evidence piled up, she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Cameras zoomed in on her face, capturing the cracks in her once confident exterior. The moment that sent shockwaves came when Crockett revealed a recorded phone call. The audio echoed through the courtroom, with Leavitt's voice discussing tactics to bury inconvenient details. Gasps erupted, reporters scribbled furiously, and the judge's eyebrows rose in disbelief. For the first time, Leavitt's attorneys asked for a recess. The humiliation was undeniable, her carefully crafted image was unraveling, live for the nation to see. The courtroom fell into chaos after the recording played. Reporters bolted out into the hallway to file breaking updates, while social media exploded with clips of the damning audio. Hashtags calling for Leavitt's resignation trended within minutes. During the recess, Karoline Leavitt sat in a private chamber with her attorneys. Her face was pale, her hands clenched tightly on the armrests. "How did she get that recording?" she hissed, her voice shaking with a mix of rage and fear. None of her lawyers had an answer. One of them finally admitted, "It doesn't matter how, what matters is that it's admissible." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained calm. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, she simply reviewed her binder, preparing for the next phase. Her quiet confidence contrasted sharply with Leavitt's frantic energy. When court resumed, Leavitt attempted damage control. Her lead attorney claimed the recording was taken out of context, but the judge didn't look convinced. Crockett responded instantly, playing an additional segment of the audio that made the context painfully clear. The room gasped again. Leavitt's expression crumbled, her lips pressing into a thin line as the cameras captured every detail. What was supposed to be her moment of strength was turning into a public unraveling. By the time the hearing ended for the day, headlines were already declaring it the most humiliating moment of Leavitt's career. Political commentators speculated if her future in office was over before it had even begun. And outside the courthouse, supporters cheered for Jasmine Crockett, holding signs that read, "Accountability wins," and "Truth over lies." That night, the media storm reached a fever pitch. Every major network replayed the courtroom audio on a loop, with anchors dissecting every word Karoline Leavitt had spoken. Pundits who once defended her now distanced themselves, calling the situation political suicide. On social media, the fallout was even harsher. Memes mocking Leavitt spread like wildfire, side-by-side clips of her bragging about her influence contrasted with the audio of her saying she would bury inconvenient details. Even her supporters struggled to defend her, and many simply went silent. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett became the face of the moment. Her calm composure, her sharp presentation, and her refusal to engage in theatrics won admiration even from those who weren't typically her allies. Commentators praised her discipline, saying she had delivered a masterclass in how to dismantle an opponent without losing composure. By morning, the headlines told the story loud and clear: Crockett's lawsuit exposes Leavitt's cracks. Leavitt humiliated in courtroom meltdown. The fall of a rising star. Inside her campaign headquarters, Leavitt's team held an emergency meeting. Donors were pulling back, staffers were panicking, and the phones rang non-stop with angry questions. The walls that once echoed with confidence now shook with despair. And yet, Jasmine Crockett didn't celebrate. When asked by reporters about her opponent's humiliation, she gave a single, sharp response: "This isn't about humiliation, it's about justice. The truth matters." That quote became the headline of the day, painting her not only as a fierce opponent but as a principled leader. By the third day, Karoline Leavitt's humiliation had reached every corner of the political world. But instead of backing down, she tried one last desperate move, striking back against Jasmine Crockett. Leavitt called a press conference, cameras flashing as she walked onto the stage with a rehearsed smile. She attempted to flip the script, accusing Crockett of political theater and calling the lawsuit a baseless stunt meant to grab attention. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pushed forward, trying to reclaim the narrative. What she didn't expect was that reporters were no longer on her side. The very first question cut deep: if the lawsuit is a stunt, How do you explain the recordings and documents already verified by independent sources? Leavitt froze, her smile fading. She stumbled through a vague answer, but the cameras captured every second of her discomfort. The press conference quickly spiraled, with more journalists pressing her on inconsistencies, financial ties, and the evidence Crockett had revealed in court. By the end, the so-called comeback turned into another disaster. Headlines blasted, Leavitt's counterattack backfires, and press conference becomes another humiliation. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't even need to respond. Her silence was powerful. She let the truth, and Leavitt's own unraveling, speak louder than any rebuttal ever could. Behind closed doors, Leavitt's allies began to retreat. The lawsuit wasn't just threatening her career, it was isolating her completely. What once looked like a strong rise in politics was now crumbling under the weight of her own words. The second courtroom session was even more intense than the first. Lines stretched outside the courthouse as reporters, spectators, and political operatives tried to get a seat. Everyone knew Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished yet, and the anticipation was electric. When the judge entered and proceedings began, Crockett rose with calm determination. She didn't waste time. She opened her binder and presented new evidence, bank transfers and contracts that directly linked Leavitt to shadowy organizations. Each page was displayed on the courtroom screen, leaving no room for denial. Leavitt's attorneys objected, claiming the documents were irrelevant. The judge overruled them. The evidence stood. Then came the knockout blow, an internal email chain between Leavitt and her closest advisors, discussing how to repackage donor money for optics. The words were there in black and white, and the courtroom gasped again. Leavitt's reaction was immediate. Her hands shook as she tried to maintain composure, but cameras caught her glaring at her attorneys as if they had betrayed her. The once confident political star now looked cornered, every move exposed. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't break stride. She calmly addressed the judge, "This case is not about speculation. It is about facts. And the facts are right here." Her words echoed through the chamber, powerful and undeniable. Outside, reporters broadcast live updates, calling it the most devastating presentation yet. Viewers across the country watched as Leavitt's credibility collapsed in real time. By the end of the day, the narrative was clear: Jasmine Crockett had total control of the courtroom, and Karoline Leavitt had no escape. By the third hour of testimony, the weight of Jasmine Crockett's evidence became unbearable for Karoline Leavitt. The cameras zoomed in as her carefully crafted composure cracked. Her face was flushed, her voice shaky whenever she tried to whisper to her attorneys. Then it happened, her breaking point. As Crockett revealed yet another incriminating document, Leavitt slammed her pen on the table and snapped, "This is outrageous. None of this proves anything." Her voice echoed through the courtroom, raw with desperation. The judge immediately struck his gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. Every reporter in the room seized the moment. Headlines were already being typed: "Leavitt loses control in courtroom outburst." Crockett didn't flinch. She simply turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, the evidence speaks louder than her anger." Her calm response stood in stark contrast to Leavitt's meltdown, amplifying the humiliation even further. The courtroom fell silent. Even Leavitt's own supporters in the gallery avoided eye contact, realizing this was no longer just a legal fight, it was a complete public collapse. When the session adjourned, Leavitt stormed out without answering a single question, cameras flashing furiously around her. Outside, Crockett briefly addressed the press. "This is not personal," she said. "This is about accountability. And accountability will always matter." The clip of her words spread instantly, while footage of Leavitt's outburst went viral in a matter of minutes. Across the nation, viewers were united in one conclusion: Jasmine Crockett had stayed strong under pressure, while Karoline Leavitt had crumbled before the world. By nightfall, Karoline Leavitt's courtroom meltdown had become the biggest story in the nation. Every news outlet replayed the clip of her slamming her pen and shouting, looping it alongside Jasmine Crockett's calm, devastating response. On social media, the reaction was brutal. Memes flooded every platform, images of Leavitt mid-outburst with captions like, "When the truth hits too hard," and $90M of humiliation. Hashtags mocking her collapse trended for hours, while Crockett supporters shared clips of her steady composure under pressure. Political analysts called it a turning point. One commentator on live television said, "Leavitt didn't just lose control, she lost credibility." Crockett came prepared with facts. Leavitt came with temper. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Even late-night comedians joined in. One joked, "If you're going to scream in court, at least don't do it with 20 cameras pointed at you." The audience roared with laughter, solidifying Leavitt's humiliation as a cultural punchline. Meanwhile, Crockett's approval skyrocketed. Her clip saying, "The evidence speaks louder than her anger," was shared millions of times, becoming the quote of the week. Even those who had never followed politics were suddenly talking about her. Inside Leavitt's camp, the mood was catastrophic. Advisors urged her to cancel appearances, donors quietly backed out, and staffers whispered that her career might already be over. What was supposed to be her rise to prominence had turned into a spiral of public embarrassment. And as Crockett remained silent overnight, refusing to comment further, her silence spoke louder than anything Leavitt could say. The next morning brought the harshest blow yet, not from Jasmine Crockett, but from Karoline Leavitt's own allies. Prominent figures who had once stood by her side began distancing themselves in public statements. One longtime supporter went on television and said bluntly, "I can't defend what we all saw yesterday. The outburst, the evidence, it speaks for itself." Another donor released a statement suspending all financial support, citing serious concerns about credibility and integrity. News outlets quickly branded it the Great Abandonment. Headlines read, "Leavitt left alone," and "Allies jump ship after courtroom meltdown." Meanwhile, Crockett appeared briefly on a morning news show. She didn't even address the drama directly. Instead, she calmly reiterated, "This case is about accountability. Nothing more, nothing less." Her measured tone only strengthened her image as the disciplined, principled figure in contrast to Leavitt's chaos. For Leavitt, the day unraveled further. Staff members quietly resigned, walking out of her headquarters as reporters snapped photos. Anonymous insiders leaked to the press that morale was at rock bottom, and that no one believes there's a path to recover. By noon, commentators weren't asking if Leavitt's career was damaged, they were asking if it was completely finished. And still, Jasmine Crockett said nothing more. She let the crumbling walls of Leavitt's own empire do the work for her. With her allies abandoning her and donors fleeing, Karoline Leavitt made one last desperate gamble. She agreed to a primetime television interview, hoping to salvage her image. The studio was packed, the cameras ready, and millions tuned in to see if she could defend herself. From the start, it went wrong. The interviewer wasted no time, playing the viral clip of Leavitt's courtroom outburst. "How do you respond to this?" they asked. Leavitt forced a laugh, calling it a moment of passion, but her nervous tone only deepened the sense of weakness. When pressed about the evidence, the documents, the emails, and the recording, Leavitt tried to pivot. "This is all taken out of context," she insisted. But the interviewer cut her off with a devastating question, "If it's out of context, why haven't you provided the full version?" Leavitt froze. Her eyes darted off camera. For several painful seconds, she couldn't answer. The silence was deafening, and the interview became a live spectacle of humiliation. Clips from the segment spread instantly across social media. Hashtags labeled the appearance as career suicide. One political commentator summed it up perfectly, "She walked into that interview to save herself, but she buried herself instead." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett didn't even acknowledge the interview. She stayed focused on the case, letting the contrast between her composure and Leavitt's unraveling play out for the entire nation to see. By the end of the night, analysts were unanimous. Leavitt's attempt to save face had backfired spectacularly, leaving her reputation in ashes. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial resumed. After Karoline Leavitt's disastrous television interview, the nation's eyes turned back to Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see if she would deliver the finishing blow. Crockett rose with her signature calm, carrying a single folder this time. The judge nodded for her to proceed, and she began to unveil the final set of evidence her team had prepared. It was devastating. The folder contained sworn affidavits from former insiders who had worked directly with Leavitt. These testimonies detailed, in clear language, how funds were mishandled, how strategies were built around misleading donors, and how Leavitt herself had overseen it all. Each affidavit was signed, sealed, and verified. Leavitt's attorneys scrambled, objecting at every turn, but the judge overruled them. The evidence was admissible. The truth was in writing. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the words were read aloud. One affidavit described Leavitt instructing staff to reframe financial reports to avoid scrutiny. Another spoke of her celebrating when certain information was successfully hidden. Leavitt's face turned ashen. She shook her head in disbelief, but the cameras captured everything. Her downfall was no longer a matter of speculation, it was documented fact. Crockett closed her presentation with a powerful line, "This case has never been about personalities. It has always been about the truth. And today, that truth is undeniable." The judge adjourned for the day, but the damage was final. Outside the courthouse, chants erupted, supporters holding signs that read "Truth Prevails" and "Crockett Delivers Justice." That night, political commentators declared it, Jasmine Crockett had ended Karoline Leavitt's credibility once and for all. The national reaction to Jasmine Crockett's final presentation was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets across the country led with bold headlines, "Crockett's evidence seals the case," and "Leavitt's career in freefall." Political commentators didn't mince words. One analyst stated bluntly on live TV, "We are witnessing the implosion of Karoline Leavitt's political future in real time." Another added, "Crockett didn't just win a case, she exposed a system of deception that Leavitt thought would never see daylight." On social media, the response was relentless. Millions shared Crockett's closing words, "The truth is undeniable," turning it into a rallying cry. Hashtags